Welcome back to another tabletop review. Today we'll look at updated solutions for disassembling and reassembling the Ruger Mark III. As .22 target pistols go, there's probably none more loved and hated than the Ruger Mark III. Loved for its quality of construction, accuracy, reliability, and overall function, or more hated for its difficulty when it comes to disassembly and reassembly challenges. This video is a continuation of a review I recorded about 2 years ago on the Mark III. Here I provide more in-depth insights and solutions to overcome common problems. Let's make sure this gun is cleared first. By the way, if you enjoy this review, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. If you saw my July 2020 video on the Ruger Mark III, you'll know that my daughter has loved this gun since she was a little kid. When I offered to give it to her recently, she wanted me to walk her through its disassembly and reassembly. It had been a while, but I was confident enough to break it down right then. However, to my embarrassment, I couldn't as easily reassemble the gun. After going through the manual's instructions twice and still failing, I gave up and had to tell my daughter I'd get back with her. The next day I fiddled with it for about an hour without luck. I reviewed a bunch of YouTube videos on reassembly. Eventually I found a video that pointed out a potential issue related to the position of the hammer strut. That was all I needed, and I was able to reassemble the gun without further problems. But it occurred to me I should probably do an updated video on the Ruger Mark III's disassembly and reassembly, in which I cover in more detail solutions to problems I've experienced. Most of the problems I've experienced myself have occurred due to issues related to the position of the hammer and/or hammer strut, and the hammer strut in relation to the cross pin and to the mainspring housing. Even the alignment of the bolt pin has been an issue. The safety not being off has occasionally happened, and whether the magazine has been inserted or not has occurred even more often. Whether the pistol is pointed up or down when pulling the trigger has also been a cause of problems for me. The Ruger Mark III is an extremely well-made pistol, but the steps required, especially for its reassembly, can appear to be outrageously complex. So it's not surprising that it doesn't seem to take much to mess things up. And if you don't really understand the mechanics of what's going on, it's easy to get into trouble and even more difficult to correct the problems you're having. It's good to start with the manual. Note that you can find Ruger manuals online for free. The Ruger Mark III's owner's manual instructions for disassembly and reassembly provide some good detailed images, some of which I'll even include here. And the written steps are fine. However, sometimes it helps to have a bit more detail, especially when you're experiencing difficulties. That's the purpose of this video. I hope you'll find it useful. Now, I suggest having a few tools handy. The first thing you'll need is a small paper clip or wire. You'll need a soft hammer and a wooden 1/8" dowel. A good light and a curvy type of pick may also be helpful. Before disassembly, make sure the gun is safe. Well, we just did that. We removed the magazine and checked it. Now, with the empty magazine returned and the safety off, point the gun in a safe direction and pull the trigger. That should drop the hammer. Then we'll flip the gun over to see this lever in the back here. This is the mainspring housing, and this lever locks the unit in place. Using a paper clip or a thin wire, catch the end of the lever and pull it up. And when you do so, this will release the latch on the mainspring housing unit. Once released, I can swing the mainspring housing out and away from the grip, and I can pull down on the housing unit to remove the bolt pin from the barrel and bolt. Note that the pin, you can see it right up here, runs through the top of the barrel, through the bolt, and if the gun is newer, you may need to use a wooden dowel and the soft hammer to tap that pin out. Next, we'll remove the magazine. Being careful that the bolt doesn't just fall out, we'll point the gun upwards and pull the trigger again. Now, I should be able to remove the bolt out of the receiver. However, if the bolt sticks while coming out, probably the hammer is up or the hammer strut is behind the rod. Pull the hammer strut out and manually move the hammer down. This is where the pick and light might be handy. With the magazine out, we need to press the barrel forward and off the frame, using the soft hammer if needed. Now before I do, I want you to take a look at the alignment of the barrel to the back of the frame here. When we reassemble, we want to try to get the alignment back as close to this position as we can. I'm just going to use my soft hammer here to tap the barrel forward to release it from the frame, and that's basically it. You could remove the spring from the bolt. It just lifts off like this. Before we try to reassemble the gun, let's take a look at how to change the position of the hammer and hammer strut, which are often the cause of problems. If you look at the frame with the magazine removed and safety off, you can see the hammer here. Behind the hammer is the hammer strut. You should be able to move the hammer up and down this far. If I insert a magazine, there's no change. But if I pull the trigger, I can push the hammer fully up. However, I may not be able to return the hammer to the flat position. That's because the hammer strut may have dropped down to where it's caught behind the pin. If I point the gun up with the hammer up, the strut should swing out away from the pin, and the hammer can now be moved back to its flat position. Remove the magazine, and the gun's hammer and hammer strut are now in the correct setup for returning the bolt. Now when we're trying to return the bolt pin, the hammer will need to be positioned up, so the magazine will need to be returned to the gun and the trigger pulled, and you'll probably need to push the hammer up manually from the rear opening for the mainspring housing. Pointing the gun up, the hammer strut should swing away from the pin. Now the hammer and hammer strut are in the correct position for returning the bolt pin and the mainspring housing. Now let's take a look at the mainspring housing for a minute. There are two parts you should understand. First, there's a pocket here that needs to capture the hammer strut when the unit is closed into the grip. So the hammer strut basically needs to align or centered with the pocket. Second is that if you look closely at the pocket, you'll see the top of the mainspring plunger. The hammer strut sits directly on top of this unit. If you miss it when assembling, there will be no spring tension when you close the mainspring housing, and the gun will not work. Understanding what's going on here should be helpful. So let's move on to reassembly. We'll begin by returning the recoil spring assembly to the bolt. Make sure the spring is straight on the bolt. Now we'll make sure the hammer is down flat to the frame, and again check that the safety is off. If you look here on the frame, you'll see a square peg, and you look at the underside of the barrel and you'll see a square hole that needs to be aligned with the square peg on the frame. Once together, tap the frame forward to lock in the barrel. Remember what we said about alignment of the end of the barrel to the back of the frame here. Tap forward on the barrel or the frame till the alignment is close to what we remember it was before we removed it earlier. Now one way to check the alignment, we can insert the mainspring housing unit pin from the top of the barrel, and we can tap the barrel and the frame back and forth until the pin can be easily inserted fully. It should fit completely down on the barrel. That should make the returning of the mainspring housing unit a much smoother process. Looking through the receiver, see that it's again flat with the frame. Next we'll return the bolt to the receiver. The spring side goes up. If the bolt won't go all the way in, the hammer may still be up. Use your finger inside the receiver to make sure that the hammer is down and that nothing is blocking the bolt. Then return the bolt. If it still stops short, it's probably the bolt release here. Just push it down and then the bolt should go in. Next, replace the empty magazine. point the gun down and pull the trigger. That should allow the hammer to fall. If the hammer does not fall forward enough, the mainspring unit will not swing into place. If this happens, sometimes with the magazine inserted, you can point the gun down, pull the trigger, and pull back the bolt bit and push the hammer up manually from the back end here. Now point the gun down and insert the bolt pin through the holes until the bolt pin tip protrudes just through the top of the barrel. Now we'll close the mainspring housing by inverting the pistols so that's pointing up. Make sure the hammer strut is aligned with the oval-shaped pocket in the mainspring housing. Make sure the empty magazine is inserted. Pull and hold the trigger to the rear and swing the mainspring housing into the grip. You should feel a bit of spring tension before the mainspring housing closes completely. When you've been able to fold the unit into the grip, if there's no spring pressure at the end of the closing, the strut has missed the pocket in the mainspring housing. Adjust before folding by making sure the strut is resting up against the mainspring housing. As you fold the housing into the grip, you may need to jiggle the gun or the mainspring housing a little to get it to align with the pocket of the mainspring housing. Press close and flip the locking lever to secure the housing. If it won't fold into the grip, check again that the hammer is forward and the hammer strut is in front of the pin. Better if it's resting on the mainspring housing centered with the pocket of the mainspring housing unit. If you're still having difficulty folding the mainspring housing, you probably still do not have the hammer in the correct position. Take a look at the hammer in relation to the frame. Look at how far forward the hammer should rotate. Look at the position of the hammer strut in relation to the pin. Note that the tip end of the strut should just barely rest on the pin. When you can feel the spring pressure, press and hold the mainspring housing down and fold the locking lever into its closed position. And that's pretty much it. Finally, we test for function. By the way, the first bolt pull can feel pretty hard because the gun is not cocked. If the bolt can only be pulled back partially, something has gone wrong. You'll need to disassemble the gun to the point after where you return the bolt to the receiver. Now before we end today's video, I'd like to remind you that if you haven't already, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe down below. And I really hope you found this video useful. Thanks for watching. Patience is really important here. Take your time, follow all the steps carefully. Eventually, with practice, you'll become more comfortable and confident at disassembling and reassembling your Mark III. I've seen people who can reassemble a Mark III in less than 20 seconds, so it's doable with practice. But to be fair, not everyone has the patience or enough interest in the Mark II or Mark III to go through all this. I can accept that. If you end up deciding that's you, there's always the Mark IV, which is a real piece of cake with its updated brilliant design for disassembly and reassembly. You could always trade up, which for you might be the best solution. And remember, any weapon you carry is better than the one you left at home. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll be back for my next tabletop review. Until next time, stay safe.